Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Love is everlasting, love is only kind, love is always patient, love will blow your mind.
And a report reveals some eye-popping stats on government spending for the federal workforce. Tens of thousands of federal employees earn more money than any governor in the country. That's according to watchdog group Open the Books. Only 407,000 federal employees made six-figure incomes in fiscal 2016. That's roughly 1 in 5.
Wow. Welcome to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Welcome to everyone who's watching the show, and welcome to everyone who is listening on all of the different avenues that you can now catch this nationally syndicated program. 866-963-2037 other call lines, and the websites are urbanfamilytalk.com, afr.net, and stacyontheright.com. So good to be with you. We're moving towards the end of the week, which I hear tell last night at the kids' basketball game. One of them had a basketball game, and the coach was saying that I may get a reprieve from these negative degree temperatures. We might actually get into the 20s, and then for 1 or 2 days, we might actually see 40 degrees. That's what I'm waiting for. I've been begging for some global warming, so bring it on. I'm ready to see it. Until then, we have a jam-packed show for you today. And I'm trying to figure out, is it Thursday? Is it really Thursday? Because I can't tell. I don't know what day it is, because with all of the days we've had off and all the different holidays and all that, it's starting to feel like, no day. So you don't know what day it is. And that is the good part about the holidays. It's also the bad part. You're like nebulous. You know it's 2018. You know it's the beginning of January, but you're not sure of much else. Pretty sure it's Thursday, though. And today on the program, we have part 2 of our encouragement that kind of touches on organization and kind of reorienting ourselves for the new year. We also have 2 fantastic guests on the show today. We're going to be speaking with RNC National Spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany. She's always a great guest. She brings us the news straight from the heart of the GOP. So we're going to speak with her about some of Trump's successes, his wins as president. We know these things don't get covered on the regular news media, so we're excited to cover them here on the show. And then we also have Jesse Kelly of the Resurgent. So those are our SOTR talkers for today. And then we also have, in addition to that piece you just heard about these government workers, and I'm sure they have, real jobs. I'm sure they put in a good 10-hour workday and they have cares and concerns, et cetera, et cetera. But for you to work for the federal government and not oversee millions of people, they probably have budgets that are similar to the budgets of entire states, because that's what our federal government is now, since it's so large. But to have these people earning more than governors, this is an interesting phenomenon. And excuse me, now speaking as someone who has family members who work for the federal government, I am not against the federal government as a thing, as an entity. I'm not completely opposed to federal employees. Obviously, I'm not, because I used to be one. As an active duty service member, I was a federal employee. But there has to be a certain, working for the government is not supposed to be a career aspiration that also makes you wealthy. At least that's not what the founders intended. So I think it needs addressing. And that's why I think that audio piece was really, really great. Also, a little bit of news. Maybe you won't be surprised by this. Fox and Friends covered the Iran story 6 times more. They spent 6 times more minutes per hour covering the Iran story from the perspective of the protests and what the people are really upset about. They spent that much more time on it than CNN's New Day on Wednesday. Now, here's the problem, because that you may say, well, of course they covered more. CNN only covered it from the perspective that the president tweeted and they didn't like what he tweeted. So the cause of the protesters is being lost in the mix over at CNN and MSNBC, because they're not reporting that the president is actually supporting the protesters. He's not supporting the mullahs, the entrenched kind of dictatorship that these people are forced to live under. No, the president is supporting the protesters who are looking for freedoms. They're looking for human rights to be re-enshrined in their country. So it's really interesting that CNN can't even bother to just give credit where credit is due. We're not looking for them to be cheerleaders of the president, but we are looking for them to tell the truth when the truth is there right in front of them. The president is on the right side of this. And why wouldn't they want to do that? Obviously, because doing that highlights the fact that President Obama was not on the right side. He sided with the government of Iran. He did not side with the people of Iran. So that's embarrassing for him. So anyway, now I want to get into this encouragement. So we were talking yesterday, and yesterday's encouragement, this is like part 2 of that, because I thought it was pretty good. And it was Ephesians 5:15 through 21, which was the part of part 1 we were covering. But right now we're digging in a little bit. We're still in Ephesians 5, but it's verses 18 and 19. And then we have a cross verse that we're going to go over as well. So first off, you have Ephesians 5:17 and 18. So 5:17 says, so then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So that's a big question for us. What is the Lord's will for us? So first, in order to understand what the will of the Lord is, we have to meditate on his will. And how do we do that? By getting into his word. We go into the word, and we're all at different levels on this thing. So no one is saying this takes an hour for you, this takes 50 minutes. That's legalism, and that's where we fail. When we go into it and I'm going to pray for an hour, or I'm going to sit and read the Bible for an hour, and we put a time limit on it, and we say, I have to do an hour a day. That's where you can get into some trouble, because you want the Holy Spirit to be with you on this, to be leading you and guiding you. And sometimes you're in there much longer. Sometimes I'm with my Bible reading much longer. And sometimes it is a little shorter, but I know I've gotten what I needed. And you do have opportunities to return to it during the day. So this is not a quest for everybody to get up like, some kind of prescription and everybody's up at 4:30 and you have to be in your Bible from 4:30 to 5:30. That's not what this is about. This is about following the leading of the Holy Spirit, but making the effort to set that appointment on a daily basis. So we have to be meditating on his will. We have to actually seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all other things will be added to you. Seek to know what our Creator wants of us. And this is a wise use of our time. So we talked a little bit yesterday about, numbering our days, making sure that we're not wasting our days, not wasting our hours, our minutes, etc. And this is one way to kind of refocus that in your first part of the day, quiet time, where you're saying, Lord, what do you have for me today? Not just laying your needs before him, but asking him, what is your will for me? Can you make it plain to me what your will is for me in this day, or on a particular issue? God, what do you want for me in this particular issue? And it feels like in the moment, I'm just being real here. It feels like when you say that, when you pray that prayer, there's a tiny part of you that's like screaming, what do you mean by that? Why are you asking that? But when God answers that prayer, you're so glad, because you're like, oh, good. Now I really feel like I know what he wants me to do, and he will answer it. So that's the joy of getting your prayers answered. But first you have to pray, right? You have to pray first in order to get the prayers answered. So you want to be spiritually focused. Ephesians 5:18 says, do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. And this is an individual thing. The Bible also says if it is a sin for you, if you feel it's a sin for you, it's a sin for you. But you're not supposed to be judging your neighbor who he doesn't feel it's a sin for him. So some people drink and it's not a problem for them. They're not drunk. They don't have a problem with it. And other people are teetotalers. They don't drink at all. This is a matter for you to seek the Father about. But the drunken part is for everybody. As Christians, we're not supposed to be drunk. Drowning your sorrows in wine and beer, it's because you have sorrows. And as Christians, we're not supposed to be sorrowful. We're supposed to be full of joy, full of the fruits of the Spirit, and none of those is sorrow. So James 4:14 says, yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. So this is, I referred to this yesterday as the way we're described in the Bible. Of course, we're a royal priesthood. We're clothed in white. We're mighty. We have the mind of Christ. There's so many positive attributes to Christianity, but there's also, the description of our lives as so much grass that withers away in the sun and blows away. Here we're described our lives as vapor. And the reason we have these really tiny, kind of almost belittling descriptions of the length of time that we spend here on this earth is because it is so finite in comparison with eternity, which is where we will spend the remainder of our time. And it's so much more time because it's without end, right? Eternal beings. That is what we are. So you're either spending eternity with Christ or you're spending it without the absence of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, completely separated off for eternity. So these are real. It's not like you just die and you're like, if you're not a Christian, you're just done. Everyone has an eternity. We are all eternal beings and we will exist in that eternity, but in one condition or the other. So when I hear this vapor thing, it kind of draws us back to this concept from yesterday and continuing on into today, that we are to be mindful with our time. And so I want to say, first off, if you're listening to me talking about the kind of organizational stuff or some of the things I touched on yesterday with this fantastic woman who has all these like videos about being organized, and I was describing her and her family and all the different things that they do. If you're not already doing your quiet time, so doing your devotions in the morning, dedicating that very first time, that it's an appointment that you set with God, you're setting that appointment. And this is, sometimes it's a quick prayer. Other times you're laying out all of the different things that you want to pray about, all the different needs and interceding for other people. It's not about the amount of time you're committing. It's that you have an appointment that you set with him and that you honor it as best you can. Obviously, if you're sick, you're praying on the fly, but you're still making that a priority so you can put him first. If you're not doing that yet, then you might want to address that first before you start delving into these kind of, it's like the surface issues of the day, but they go down to a deep level for us because it's difficult to have a good day when you're not organized. And I've been experiencing this on steroids. Some of the days I'm just so disorganized. And then at night when I'm like, whoo, this day just feels like a camel that's been on my back all day. And I don't feel like I've had a lot of joy. And then I look back and I can see pockets of time where I wasn't wise with my time, or I said yes to other commitments that I should have just said, you know what, I can't do that today. And it's okay to say that. In fact, it should be a mandate for you, especially if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s and early 40s. We as women, especially, speaking to the women here for a quick second, because men don't seem to have this problem. We tend to say yes before we really think about what it is that we're being asked to do and count the cost towards our time and our previous commitments. And so you want to say yes because you don't want, the motto is don't say no, take every opportunity. But if you really live like that, you're going to be frazzled. You're going to experience a certain level of burden over things that you find a lot of joy in, things that you really want to prioritize and get done. They'll get compressed into tighter and tighter amounts of time that will make it difficult for you to do these things. And you want to have the time to get the things that are of highest priority to you done, which means you have to be willing to say no. Now, you have to be willing to say yes, obviously, but you have to be willing to say no. And the reason why it's so important to say no is because when you prioritize the most important things, it prepares you for the promotion and the expansion and the growth that you're looking for in those areas. It prepares you for that. And there'll always be time to say yes. So that doesn't mean I'm trying to give you an excuse to say no every time someone at church asks you for anything, or, I'm not saying that, but I am just offering the women who are listening to this show, I'm saying receive the mantle of no, utilize it. I've used it more and more often every year that every year that passes, I feel more empowered to say no. And oftentimes you'll find, because you're expecting the person to have a really negative reaction to you saying no, what they often do is they'll say, oh, well, I just thought I'd ask, and then they'll ask someone else who actually has the time to do it, and that person will do it. So there you go. And then you aren't any worse for the wear, and you can make an appointment with yourself to evaluate your time to see if the next time they need you to do that, you can do it then. And then it will not negatively impact the rest of your schedule. So speaking not from the choir, but from, this is a problem I have. So there you go. So the organizational stuff is beyond just the simple act of setting time aside for God, but it all works together in concert. So we want to get our personal time with God set down, set a reminder for yourself, and then watch how he'll make other parts of your day easier for you because you're committing yourself to him first. And then we'll understand what his will is, and we'll be much more joyful, operating in more of the fruits of the Spirit. It's an important thing for us to kind of say, I'm getting this down. It's the beginning of the year. I want to get that down. And so let's do it. We can do it, and we must do it, and we'll be blessed if we do. So we're going to come back with our first guest, Kayleigh McEnany of the RNC. Can't wait to talk to her right after these messages. Stay right there.
Preborn is saving babies' lives.
My name is Omaris, and I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant. I felt that if I brought a child to this planet, that I could not take care of it, and I could not be mentally prepared to handle everything that comes with having a child. So I thought my best option was to have an abortion. And once I came to have my ultrasound and I heard his heartbeat, I could not have an abortion.
The Ministry of Preborn saves babies' lives through ultrasounds. When a mother hears her baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound, she'll choose life 80% of the time. To donate and provide for a free ultrasound to help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. I have a great friend who teaches at a Christian college, and God has used this guy in wonderful ways, especially to mentor and encourage young men. He's been very successful in helping them find and discover God's mission for their lives and get after it. He expresses great confidence in them, and that confidence bolsters their faith. And years later, after establishing thriving ministries, often they return to thank my friend for seeing their potential. Did you know that God does the same with us? Listen to Judges chapter 6, verses 12 and 14. God calls Gideon and gives him an assignment that really defies where he is. Verse 12 says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him," meaning Gideon, "and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior.'" Now that's ironic because Gideon was hiding out. He was afraid. He was scared of the Midianites. He was concealing himself, and the Lord says, "God is with you, O valiant warrior." Verse 14, "And the Lord looked at him and said, 'Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have not I sent you?'" God focuses on our potential and not on where we are. Gideon was not in a place of strength, so to speak, but God saw who he could make him. God will often call us what he wants us to become. He called Gideon a valiant warrior before he fought the first fight. He said, "Gideon, you're a strong man. You're a valiant warrior. I see what you can be." That's what God sees in you. Here's what I want you to remember today. God's call to do something is also a call to be someone. Submit to God's call for your life. He sees what he can make of you. So now become what he calls you.
Legacy Moment is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Global Ministries.
I face a giant in over my head. Help me to look up.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. And you can subscribe over at my blog, stacyontheright.com. And also follow me on Twitter at stacyontheright. Also Instagram if you want. It's up to you. But I'd love for you to do it. So happy New Year to you. I'm really glad to be back with you in the new year and to have as our guest today, first hour, Kayleigh McEnany. She's the national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. And I always love it when she comes on and brings us the news straight from the inside, like all the freshest, bestest stuff. So thanks so much for coming on today, Kayleigh.
Hey, Stacy. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to chat with you in the new year because there's so much good news with the regulatory cleanup that the president has been, just silent but deadly with those regulations, destroying them 16 for one, every new one. And then, of course, the tax reform bill, which I happened to speak to a senator this morning about another topic, and we got to just kind of kibbutzing and being happy about the passage of the tax reform bill. Really, the most substantial piece of tax legislation since the Reagan era, and under a president who, he's been castigated for not being a Republican, not being this, not being that, but he managed to bring forward a tax reform bill such as the one that was just signed into law. So what else can we look forward to?
There's a lot. We went over at the beginning of this week all of the priorities we have for 2018, and it was a long, ambitious list, but one that I think is achievable. I think Republicans really came together around tax cuts. As you mentioned, so exciting, so historic, and to see Republicans unified in the Rose Garden with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and the president standing together as one party, that was a great image, and I think a really great unifying moment that gives us the energy and the tailwind we need as we move into infrastructure, immigration reform, finding a true replacement for Obamacare. There's a long, long list of things to do, but those are just three of the many.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack a few of the ones that I keep hearing actually Democrats talk about. So they're saying, the Democrats, that they just don't see how infrastructure can get done in 2018. And I interpret that statement as, you've already gotten tax reform done and it makes you look good. If we let you pass infrastructure, you're going to win in the fall. So we got to stop you from doing that. Am I right?
Well, I think both parties have signified how important infrastructure is, but the real question lies, and if Democrats are only saying that in word and not in action, we have seen some Democrats come out and say, oh, this is important, we want to work with Republicans. But I don't quite believe that until I see them at the meetings, negotiating, making it happen, because they have been the party of obstructionists. So what I imagine we'll see, and this is just a prediction, Republicans will put together an infrastructure plan, one that let's say it's $1 trillion, that relies on public-private partnerships to booster our infrastructure. And you'll hear Democrats saying, oh, this empowers big business, and this empowers the private sector, and we don't like that. It should be all public sector government spending. So they'll find a way, I think, to obstruct, but I hope that's not the case, because I like to see bipartisanship.
I do too. I mean, in certain instances, bipartisanship can be fantastic. I think infrastructure is one of those areas. I do want to see more of whatever is done be geared towards enabling the private sector to do the work, because I feel like the government is too big. And I'm not sure if you saw, they were reporting on Fox News that a huge percentage of government employees earn more than $407,000 a year, which is more than a sitting governor of an entire state. And there's some outrageous number, like 1 out of every 5 government employees earns that amount of money. So I think we've already spent enough money in the government sector.
We have, definitely. And you look back at history, before we spend $1 trillion more, let's look at the last $1 trillion we spent on infrastructure. That would be under the Obama administration. And of course, he had a $787 billion stimulus package, and he promised shovel-ready jobs, but there were no shovel-ready jobs, as he later admitted. And our infrastructure is still failing. It's still rated at a D+. So that trillion didn't go so far in the hands of government. So the next trillion, if that's what the number is, let's empower the private sector and also states to really come in and do the legwork.
So how will that happen? What does that look like, Kayleigh? Because I'm on board with you. I think you articulated that perfectly. But how do we take a message like the one you just shared and translate that into the greater public who are going to be listening to MSNBC and all of the kind of left-wing media? How do we translate that message over to the people who need to hear it?
Well, I think by making it local, because we all have seen problems with our infrastructure in our own daily lives. You know, my husband and I were riding down the street during Christmas break, and he says, why'd you choose to live in a city where the roads are just terrible and they wear down my tires nonstop? And it's a good question, and I'm sure a lot of Americans across the country feel that. You see a lot of the airport outages we've seen, some of the train incidences. We need to really revamp our railway system and our roads, and I think by taking it local, because I think everyone can relate to the fact that, our roads aren't in quite the best shape, at least not where I live.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have pockets of fantastic, and then the rest of it, just you're kind of like, they're fixing that again? What's going on with it? It's like it's always torn up. And you're right. Your car experiences, you can hear your car kind of going, ouch, ouch, ouch. It's like it rattles more after you drive over the rough road than it ever did before.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so what about the repeal of Obamacare? I know that was a subject that was not, met with any kind of cooperation from the Democrats. We no longer have the individual mandate, which kind of guts the program, but it still lives on. The Cadillac tax is still there. A number of other things are still there. How do we get that done in 2018?
Well, I think that the stakes will be so high for Democrats, and hopefully they'll be forced to come to the table, because now that Americans are not forced to buy health care as they were before the tax cut bill, because that, of course, repealed the individual mandate that forced Americans to buy health care, now that that's not a component of this, a lot of this has been unraveled. That and plus the cost-sharing reduction payments, those, of course, were the big payouts to fat cat insurance companies. Now that those two things are gone, I think the system will start. It was already on a spiral. I think it will spiral more. And as Republicans do the responsible thing and try to come up with a replacement that works, because Obamacare was always an actuarial failure, meaning it was not fiscally sound. As Republicans work to find a replacement, I hope Democrats are going to be pushed to negotiate, because it's just not right to leave the American people in a situation where they have double-digit soaring premiums.
So speaking of insurance, the president has signed a new rule that allows Americans to purchase their insurance across state lines. And of course, any rulemaking requires a time for public comment. But I'm thinking this is going to be something that is well received by Americans, maybe not by Democrats per se, but by Americans. And so that's another part of getting rid of Obamacare, or I mean, I'm kind of reading that as another way around the fact that it hasn't been repealed so far.
Right, that's a big part of this. I think the replacement component, that's a huge part of replacing Obamacare, is moving to a free market system, one that has, reasonable solutions that make sense, that are workable. And one of those reasonable solutions is what you just said, allowing insurance companies to compete across state lines. Instead, what we have now are we have insurance companies in various states that are basically small monopolies that raise prices. They don't have to compete for business. And we want a more competitive system, because when insurance companies are allowed to compete and sell across state lines, then cheaper plans are allowed to travel across from one state and into the next. And it makes sense. It's a free market principle that works, and that is part of the solution. You're absolutely right to point to that, and a big deal if that happens. Okay,
so besides infrastructure and possibly the repeal of Obamacare, or at least the continuing the dismantling of it bit by bit, and that leaves us with DACA and the wall. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, this is going to be a huge, maybe even explosive set of negotiations to come leading up to March, because of course March is the deadline that the president has imposed for getting a permanent DACA fix. And Democrats are being just recalcitrant and unflexible and saying we will not give money to the wall. Meanwhile, Republicans have said, yes, we'll give a permanent DACA fix. That's fine, but you guys have to, in exchange, give us the money for the wall. And Democrats so far haven't indicated a willingness to move, and Democrats will have to answer to the American people, because let's not forget they put us in this situation when Obama did that unconstitutional executive action that granted amnesty to these folks that was then, at least in part, rescinded by courts. So they put people in a very precarious situation, and it was an unconstitutional executive action. So now it's time for a permanent solution, and it's on Democrats to come to the table.
It is. I actually covered a little bit of some audio of one of the GOP reps. Let's see. GOP rep Tom Cole. He said Dreamers deserve to be given legal status, but he then went on to explain, because I was feeling like, is he in rhino country? I can't stand what he just said. But then he went on to say the border wall is an obvious trade-off. Do the Republicans need to change their rhetoric and start talking about the fact that there will be no DACA fix? There will be no change whatsoever. We'll leave the law as it is, which means that these special dispensations will expire and people will be under threat of deportation if the wall is not funded. And the second part of that question is, I thought that 20 years ago or something like that, Congress appropriated funds and that those funds have never been accessed, so there is some funding for it.
Yes, there is some funding. It's not enough, so we do need additional funding. But you're right to say we can move around some DHS resources, and that's helpful. So yes, there is money that has been appropriated that can be used, but it's not enough. So it is important to say, we're not giving this unless you give us the wall. And what I think is so important for Republicans to say, and I haven't heard enough Republicans saying this, is kind of what I hinted at in the previous statement, just that we need to make clear that if this doesn't happen, it is on Democrats. Because President Obama himself said 22 times, I lack the power to grant widespread legal status. And then when he put into place DACA, he did just that. So he went back on what he said, basically because Congress wouldn't work with him. So this whole situation that is unfortunate for these individuals who are caught up in it is because of Democrats. And it's important for the American people to know, if DACA doesn't happen, it's on you, Democrats, because not only did you get us into this situation, but you didn't negotiate with us and work with us in finding a permanent fix.
Okay, so speaking with Kayleigh McEnany, national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, so lucky for us to have your time today. And I love the fact that you don't have any waffling going on. All the questions I'm asking you, you're totally killing it. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
So one of the things that I've been concerned with that has to do with this same topic, and we actually spoke to Kurt Schlichter yesterday on the program, and he actually laid out the other parts, because I always say we need the wall funding, and then I stop there. But he said we need the end to chain migration, and there are a few other components that we're looking for. So it's not just wall funding that we're willing to exchange for the legalization of the 800,000 so-called dreamers. And I want to say also, who do you legalize first, Kayleigh? Under chain migration, if you're given legal status and you're allowed to bring in some other family members, aren't you going to legalize the very parents who brought you here illegally, the actual original lawbreakers? Of course. You're going to say, I want my mom and dad to be under my, family chain. So we have to end the chain migration too. Is that going to be a part of the conversation?
Absolutely. The president has said how important this is, and we remember Tom Cotton and others in the Senate kind of shepherding and trying to make this happen, coming up with the RAISE Act, I believe it was called, to end chain migration. It's important. I would love to see it as a part of this, because it makes sense that instead of having a situation where someone comes into the country illegally, gets amnesty, then any person basically affiliated with them, any relative, I should say, blood relative, there's a certain number of blood relatives. They're basically, if you're too far out, you're excluded. But long story short, a lot of your relatives get to come in. Instead of having that, we need a system that prioritizes folks who want to be in this country, individuals who have learned the English language, who have gone to that extraordinary extent because they so badly want to be a part of the American culture and the American way, individuals that we need for certain jobs where there are job shortages. This is how it should work. These folks should come first in a legal and in a fair way. So yes, this is a part of it. I hope to see that in there. I know the wall is mandatory, must be in there. Chain migration is definitely a high priority to be in there as well.
Yeah, I loved Stephen Miller's work presenting the information on the RAISE Act, even though the Democrats acted like petulant children when he was actually sharing the information. What he shared, in my opinion, was very, very, I wouldn't even say it's past coherent. It made so much sense to me that I couldn't believe that that wasn't already the law of the land. But one of the things that the president ran on during his campaign, and it was the central issue, I believe, that clinched the nomination for him, was immigration, American sovereignty, closing the border, and fixing our immigration system. And so to see him complete that this year would be, out of all of the different things, and I hope they get to them all, but I do feel like it's priority one because it answers a campaign promise, and it's a concern for a majority of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation.
That's definitely right. And you're correct to say this was one of the key promises. It's what he ran on. It was in his, I believe, the very first speech he ever gave. I remember hearing about the wall. It's an important priority. And you're right. If it can be accomplished this year, and we have tax cuts, and we have immigration and all of the other achievements, the economy soaring and ISIS on the run, I think it'll be a really good 2018 midterm election. And if we expand our majorities, I mean, the Democrats can just forget about winning back anything in Washington for a long time, because we will have a lot of prosperity to look forward to.
So exciting, and always exciting to speak to you, especially now that we're in the new year. Happy New Year to you. And I look
Happy New Year, yes.
I look forward to us chatting again about more details of past legislation and successful runs at, getting more campaign promises fulfilled on behalf of the American people by the GOP. Thank you for your time today, Kayleigh.
Thank you so much, Stacy.
All right, talk again soon. So that's Kayleigh McEnany, RNC national spokesperson, and all-around awesome chick who comes on and answers all the questions without any kind of, like, she just doesn't have a problem answering the hard questions. I love that. All right, we're going to be back with more Stacy on the right after these messages. Keep it here.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Have you ever been jealous of someone? Maybe your coworker got the position you felt you deserved, along with the raise. Maybe your neighbor invited you over to see the new luxury car, or maybe your roommate got the newest iPad and keeps showing off all the cool apps. Here's the thing. Jealous people obsess about the object of jealousy, believing that if they get what someone else has, then they'll be fulfilled. Instead of building others up, jealousy wants to destroy them. The moment jealous thoughts run through your mind, ask God to take them away. Never let jealousy take hold. It always leaves a bitter taste in your mouth.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Ever dealt with temptation? Whether it's food, lust, or even sex? 1 Corinthians 10:13 says that He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Here at Urban Family Talk, we stand for truth, wisdom, and empowerment. Believers have the power to withstand the temptation of the enemy. Get empowerment to stand at urbanfamilytalk.com. Yo, what's up?
Hey, nothing much, man. Just trying to listen to this last song for the music final.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna fail for the most part. I haven't even listened to it.
Ugh, yeah, me neither. I've been too busy listening to The Word on the Street.
The Word on the Street?
Wait, you guys haven't heard?
No, I haven't heard of
not
it.
me.
Not that one.
Well, check this out.
There is only one true word, and that is the Word of God, which is what you will hear on Word on the Street, hosted by me, Victory McIntosh. Tune in as we discuss some of the latest hot topics and life issues and filter them all through the holy Word of God. It is possible to live righteous before the Lord and enjoy doing it. Tune in Saturday mornings at 9 Central Time. You don't want to miss it.
If you've been walking the same old road for miles and miles.
That's quite the honor. Let me ask you, though, how is this all going down, this banning back and forth at the White House, the president and his remarks? It was not just a tweet. It was a very clear, delineated statement. What's going on?
Well, look, I think, Neil, first of all, Bannon has an exaggerated sense of self-importance, and the news media, of course, builds it up because it's exactly, in the age of the Kardashians, the kind of nonsense that they love to fill time and space with. So they can run around and think about that as opposed to the largest tax cut in history, or the most deregulation in history, or the best economic growth in more than 10 years.
But didn't Bannon feed this beat, Snoop, by saying this outlandish stuff?
Well, look, I think that Bannon thinks he's extraordinarily important, but the fact is Trump had won the nomination without Bannon. Trump would have won the presidency without Bannon, and Trump has governed without Bannon. So I think there's an exaggerated sense of who Steve is, and I think, remember, this is a guy who got fired. So you have a guy who's been fired, who's trying to claim a bunch of things, which he apparently did not claim at the time. And I think you have to just say it's noise. It has nothing to do with the things that matter to America, and the things that matter to the American people have no relationship to the kind of noise that we're going to spend all day today with. And luckily for the president, he's really come to distinguish between the things that matter and the things that don't. The meeting this weekend at Camp David matters with the Republican leadership. Steve Bannon saying a bunch of junk doesn't really matter in the long run. It'll disappear.
Whoa. So lots of people are delivering the heavy duty. I'm not talking about the gloved smack. I'm talking about the glove is off, the steel fist is out, and they're punching back at Bannon hard over this tell-all book, over the leaked portions, over the really nasty things that are coming out that are supposed to be contained therein. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Stacy Washington. I'm the co-chair for National Center's Project 21 Advisory Council for Black Leadership, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And I also want to point you guys over to stacyontheright.com and also urbanfamilytalk.com/Stacy. That's where you can find the podcast, and you can also find, we've been putting up, and I'm a little behind, but we've been putting up the live streams over there. So if you're not a Facebook user, but you want to watch the show, you can watch the show on the YouTube downloads. You can either watch it live on YouTube. The live stream is up right now, or you can go to stacyontheright.com and find the streams over there. They get put up sometimes when I'm good during the show, other times after the show. So I have a little bit of catching up to do, but it's the new year. So yeah, better use of my time and all that good jazz. So we're listening to Newt Gingrich coming in from the break, talking about Steve Bannon having an exaggerated sense of self-importance. And this story, so yesterday I didn't really speak much about it, except, when Kurt Schlichter came on the program, we talked a little bit about how important it is that people don't think of themselves as being bigger than a movement. And that's true. I said I'd never met Steve Bannon. And then last night I was thinking through the last time I saw Andrew Breitbart before he passed away. And I remembered that Steve Bannon was at that same conference, but I didn't meet him. I didn't go over and say hi. I actually believe it was him and Sonny Johnson and some other people. And I was speaking with another group in the lobby of the hotel where the conference was being held. And afterwards, they broke off. Sonny Johnson and I spoke for a few minutes. And then Andrew Breitbart, who I actually met here in St. Louis when he was here for a dinner, and some other things that he was doing with some other conservative people who used to live in St. Louis. And we went to dinner together, and we all sat around the table and ate. And then afterwards, I only spoke with him briefly. And then I spoke with him briefly at that conference, just a couple of minutes. So, that being said, I don't have personal interactions with Steve Bannon. But I can say that when he was in the White House, I had no problem with it because the president chose him to be there, and I wasn't going to second guess the decision. Now that Steve Bannon's out of the White House, and I guess his access is a bit limited, or whatever the case is, he seems pretty angry. And he's now moving in the direction of not supporting the president and being a thorn in his side. Obviously, I can't agree with that. I can't support that. It's a distraction. And remember, when he made his announcement that he'd come out of the White House and he was going to be fighting and primarying establishment Republicans, at that point, I was kind of like, yeah, well, if you find rhinos that need to be rooted out, go for it. And I was one of the few people who said that. But now that he's made it clear that these efforts that he's been mounting are only resulting in losses for the Republicans to Democrats, it's time to rethink that strategy and to move on. And there's no reason why Steve Bannon can't keep running Breitbart and be a very influential member of, the conservative movement from that perch. Breitbart is still huge. I know the left regularly vilifies it. They've tried to re-characterize it as a white supremacy site. But the fact is, I have a piece up over there from a few months ago. I know a lot of the people who write there, who have the editors over there, they're not white supremacists. So, because obviously, if they were, then why would they ever meet me, have dinner with me, talk to me, allow me to post anything over there? It's just a mischaracterization, and it's a slanderous type of they want to frame Breitbart as something that can't be trusted. They're breaking news over there all the time. So my hope is that Steve Bannon will simmer down from this, it's like a newly found crusade, and take a step back and reevaluate what's really important here and what it will look like in 5 years and 10 years. Because remember, in the moment, all of it seems it's so critical that we, I've got to make sure people understand that I'm a part of this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. But 5 years from now, what will it look like? What will it feel like? Will it matter? I dare say, because 5 years from now, that would be we'd be into the second term of a President Trump, hopefully. Or if Steve Bannon successfully primaries Republicans and takes them out of office, you could be into the first term of a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris. I mean, these are names of people who shouldn't be managing a dog catcher business, let alone in the office of the presidency. So keep that in perspective here. We've got to be mindful of what we're actually hoping for. And so for Steve Bannon, there isn't any room for that. We have to get these other legislative agenda items through and get them under our belt going into 2018. And why am I so intent on that? If you're listening to the show and you're a Democrat or you don't understand conservatism, this isn't about me worshiping Donald Trump or having something for conservatives or Republicans no, it's about the pro-life issue. So Planned Parenthood has released their most recent report that shows that they've aborted 7.1 million people. So more than the number of people who live in the state of Missouri since the passage of Roe v. Wade. And we fund that organization with our tax dollars. They have hundreds more. I'll pull that up for you. Hundreds more. I just read the story this morning and I was just like flabbergasted. Hundreds more abortions than they have pregnancy resource center referrals or prenatal care. So when we talk about this, when we're thinking about what is important, what do we care about? That's what I care about. And I really am that single issue voter. That's what delineated Hillary Clinton from Donald Trump. I mean, they were so far apart on almost every issue. But the number one issue for me, as much as I care about the border and illegal immigration, I care more about the pro-life issue. So my hope is that when they start these budget negotiations, which we didn't actually have time to talk to Kayleigh, and delve into the budget, but she'll be back on. Maybe we'll just do just an interview on the budget. My hope is that he'll answer the campaign promise that he made to defund Planned Parenthood. And that's where you have to make your decision as a Christian. That's where the rubber meets the road. Either you're for what the Bible says about every single one of us, with birth defects and deformities or without, 90 years old needing a hip replacement and with dementia, or 99 years old and healthy and spry and speed walking in the mall and shopping and still living on your own, that it is our time lies in his hands. And that he knows us before we're formed in our mother's womb. He knows us. He's numbered the hairs on our head. He knows when we'll be born and when we will die, the appointed time for us to leave this earth. He knows all of that. He loves us. He knows us personally. And therefore, it is not our place as human beings to make the decision to snuff lives out for the convenience of any convenience at all. I'm not going to list off any of them because none of them are important enough to do that. And as Christians, this should be an issue where we can stand together. But just like the whole Target thing, I'm there. I'm sorry, I'm there. Oh my goodness. So I can't tell you how many people that I know are Bible-believing Christians, good Christian people who keep telling me they're shopping at Target. Now, never mind the fact that I'm working here for American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Never mind the fact that we have a naughty and nice list. Never mind the fact that there's been a boycott of Target going on by AFA for 2 years. You still got Christians shopping at Target. Now, I'm going to tell you, let's have a come clean moment here. If I can give up Target, me and our two daughters, we were some Target shopping fanatics. If we can give it up, you can too. Anyone can give it up. The convenience of walking in there and having all the end caps with the pretty displays, and now they have Chip and Joanna Gaines merchandise. they don't have anything in there that is more important to me than their stand in the culture war, where they say that grown men can change their clothes in the same changing facilities as young women and little girls, and their position on having grown men, regardless of if they're really going through a sex change or not, using the bathroom with women. Those are two things I just can't abide. And that is the reason why we don't shop there anymore. And we're coming up on 3 years. And so this is what I don't understand. You're in Bible study every week on Wednesday, and you proudly post about it on Facebook. You're going to church every Sunday. You're leading a Bible study. You're doing all the right things. You know how to, run up and down the aisles when you go into the Holy Spirit. You got the whole Christian thing down. But you still think it's okay for the tax dollars to go to Planned Parenthood, which is an abortion outfit. And you sit in judgment of someone like me where, I'm voting with the Republicans and Trump's the supposed white supremacist, but you're fine with shopping at Target and supporting Planned Parenthood. Please help me to understand where you have any room to judge. You don't. You're actually in the wrong yourself. Never mind the fact that Donald Trump's not a white supremacist, and there's no reason why any person would have a problem with voting for him. Just open your eyes and understand the difference between him and Hillary Clinton. But it's this continual avoidance. It's like you see the abortion issue and you're like, not that, not today. And I do have, a few grains of understanding for that sentiment. It's just a tough topic. But you know how to make it untough? Go to the Word and see what it says about killing of innocents. It's actually the sacrifice of the unborn is akin to the sacrifices of children that were made to the god Molech, the, false idol Molech, back in, the biblical times. Well, this ain't anything new. Abortion isn't any new thing. But what is new is this idea that we have to fund it with taxpayer dollars so we can all be complicit. So all of us can carry the stain of 7.1 million abortions by Planned Parenthood, funded by the taxpayers. That should be a problem for you as a Christian, and it should be your number one voting issue. And if you're not willing to at least prayerfully consider that, then you're just like every other faux Christian on Wednesdays and Sundays, and you're standing there and you got your arms in the air waving around and you're praising God. And meanwhile, because Planned Parenthood does their biggest business on Sundays, the blood of 4,300 innocents is being spilled on a daily basis. And that number has gone down just a tad, praise God. The abortion rate is lowering due to contraception and due to, a lot of really negative stories about Planned Parenthood and the proliferation of pregnancy resource centers that are now branding themselves and reaching out to the women in need in ways that are very meaningful and market friendly, and due to prayer, obviously. But what good is it if you stand inside the walls of the sanctuary with your hands raised up, singing your praises and the screams and cries of the innocent, 4,000 strong a day? They go by silently without your notice. What exactly are your arms raised up for? And, I just don't care if you're offended because you're mad at the wrong chick. I didn't write the Bible. I didn't say before I formed you, I knew you. I didn't say I knew you before I formed this earth. I didn't say I knit you together in your mother's womb. I didn't say you shall not touch my anointed. God said that. So emailing me isn't going to do you any good, is it? So put your hands down. Stop bragging about being in church on Wednesday and figure out what issues really matter. Not to me, to him. We'll be back with Hour 2 right after this. Stay there.
Urban Family Talk.
Always stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team of One News Now. Use the One News Now mobile app. It neatly categorizes news and articles from the One News Now website in an easy-to-find format. You can read the stories, watch videos, and conveniently share any news story. It's now available for download from your phone's App Store.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Coastal cities along the eastern seaboard could experience the worst from the snowstorm hitting the region, with high winds causing near whiteout conditions and storm surge pushing bone-chilling seawater into the streets. Weather forecasters are adjusting their initial
outraged where most of the young under 25 are unemployed. 4 out of every 10 don't have a job.
Absolutely. Look, the sanctions against Iran are working as well. And you look at what is going on over there, and they don't like the president, even though they kind of like him, don't like him really, but they really hate the Ayatollah. Now, keep in mind, one of the things Sarah Huckabee Sanders said yesterday is the people of Iran must be given basic human rights.
Oh, you guys, welcome back to Stacy on the Right. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. And we have so much more show to kind of get to. So what I want to do is, first of all, you heard the message about it was Abraham Hamilton III. He's the host of the Hamilton Corner that's airing here on Urban Family Talk and American Family Radio at 5 p.m. every day, talking about calling our legislators and our senators and asking them to defund Planned Parenthood. And I know sometimes when you hear that, when you hear, call your congressperson, you think, well, what good is that going to do? And the person who answers the phone never sounds like they care what you've just shared. But the point is not to convince the person that you're calling on the phone. The point is to fill out. So you say what your issue is, where you live in the district, and why you called. They write those pertinent pieces of information down, and then those calls are logged. So the reason why it's important is just think about how many states Urban Family Talk is in. Think about how many states American Family Radio is in. How many different Senate districts the people who listen to this program are in. Then think about if everyone who was listening took the time to call, the amount of logging that would go on at these Senate offices. And what they do is if they get less than, say, 10 calls about an issue, it's important to you, but it's not important to enough of the constituents for them to devote their time to it. And remember, they're busy working on all of these different issues. This is what happens when you have a government that's so big and so wide and so, full of really important things it has to do. Then the things that are really important get pushed off to the wayside. So every one of us that calls individually, it doesn't make that big of a difference. Unless you're a donor. If you donate money, then your calls are really important and you need to make sure they know I also donated. I've given to the senator or whoever, their congressperson. But let's say every single person that listens to this program and to Lion Chasers and Airing the Addisons and all of the programs here on this network, if every person who cares about the life issue were to call and leave that information, name, address, the issue, and what you want the senator to do, what you want the congressperson to do, then they would have thousands, tens of thousands of calls that those people would then have to pay attention to. We're getting a lot of calls about this. Americans know the budget discussion is coming up. The appropriators are going to get the budget, the top line number from the president, and they're going to go back into their little, their cave, their beautifully appointed caves with the appropriate amount of federalistic styled wainscoting, because, none of them work in caves anymore. Now they all have nice buildings. And they're going to get in there and they're going to figure out exactly what needs to be done. And when they do that, the Planned Parenthood funding is going to be on the block. So when you hear Abe doing that commercial and asking you to call in, it takes little to no time. In fact, let me see. I had a website that I was giving out when I was talking about the Cadillac tax. It's callmycongress.com. You put that in. So you're at work, you're at home, whenever you're in front of your computer, you type in callmycongress.com. It says street address, but you don't have to put that in. Zip code. I'm going to put my zip code in there. I click enter and it tells me what congressional district I'm in. It gives me a permanent link to the page so I can put it up. I can email it to other people who I know live in the district. But most importantly, it gives me all of my representatives, 2 senators and 1 congressperson. And then the number is right here, which if you have a MacBook, you can click that number and your laptop will call that number. And then you can tell exactly what I just shared with you. They're only going to ask you for a few things and they're not going to sound like they agree with you, even though you're calling perhaps, as is for me, I live in a Republican district. If your senator is a Democrat, You can still call in. They're going to still log that call in. They're still going to log it. So if you live in a Democrat district, but this is an issue for you, it's a nonpartisan issue. The pro-life issue is nonpartisan, by the way. It's the Republican Party platform that currently respects life, but the Democrats used to believe the same thing. When I was a child, Democrats and Republicans agreed together that abortion was wrong. That was just, they were much more Christian oriented back then. Now, not so much. So you can call your Democrat as well. But the website is callmycongress.com. Callmycongress.com. I don't know who put this thing up, but it is extremely useful. In addition, it gives you the Twitter link. You can tweet the person about it. It has govtrack.us, which is their voting record. There's a link to C-SPAN, so you can see all of their appearances in Congress that have been cataloged by C-SPAN. And it also tells you when they're up for election again. So, of course, you've got 2018 and 2022, for depending on what year they were elected. The reason it's important is because without those calls, it's not an issue. And, if we were just some streaming podcast on some, really tiny network that didn't have any ability to impact these kinds of issues, then it would be a little crazy for me to devote, the first 5 minutes of this segment to covering the promo commercial by Abe about calling in about them defunding Planned Parenthood. But that's not the case. This is an enormously impactful radio outfit, not just Urban Family Talk, but American Family Radio, the parent company. Millions of people are hearing the message here. And if you're concerned with eternity, and if you're concerned with our position as a nation, and with the righteousness factor, with the blessings, with God's hand of favor being turned towards us, then this should be of concern to you. And making that phone call is one of those things that you do. You're laying up your treasure in heaven by putting just that little bit of your time on the altar to call and make your voice heard. And if you would do it on an equal pay issue, if you would do it on a tax issue, why not do it on the pro-life issue? It's just something that we should do. So now I'd like to get back onto the show sheet because we did veer off just a tad. And so we have clip 3. Fox and Friends cover Iran 6 times more than CNN's New Day on Wednesday. This is pretty interesting. It's number 3.
Fascinating developments in about 40 cities throughout Iran as we see some unrest happening. And what's the main difference between the 2009 uprising and the 2017? According to Iranian experts, this starts almost all young. This starts almost all rural. And believe it or not, it was the leak of a document that spurred this unrest, that showed the top secret budget proposed by their president, Rouhani, about how much of their money was going to terrorism, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. That got the population outraged, where most of the young under 25 are unemployed. 4 out of every 10 don't have a job.
Absolutely. Look, the sanctions against Iran are working as well. And you look at what is going on over there, and they don't like the president, even though they kind of like him, don't like him really, but they really hate the Ayatollah. Now, keep in mind, one of the things Sarah Huckabee Sanders said yesterday is the people of Iran must be given basic human rights.
So they are looking for basic human rights there. And that's what these protests are largely about. But it's interesting that it took some information that they weren't aware of, how much of their own money is being used to fund terrorism and is destroying their reputation around the world as a people group, and makes people look askance at Iranians. And they're just really fed up with it. They're not getting any of the government services that they deserve to get for the amount of money that they have to give to the government. And to find out that that money, instead of going to help their own country, is going to fund terrorism around the globe, they've had enough. So it's fascinating, but there's more. You've got this American injured by a bomb, and he spoke out about the Iranian atrocities. It's number 4.
Also, Iran's got to stop being a state sponsor of terror. And there was a guest on by the name of Robert Bartlett, a retired staff sergeant. He was injured by an Iranian bomb. And what he depicts is, over the last number of years, how many people, United States citizens, have been injured by Iran. Watch this.
You know, when they got the blood of 500 Americans just in the last few years on their hands, you know, that they've been killing Americans since the 1970s, and we just have, we just really haven't done a whole lot of really about it. The billions of dollars and money to go over, that obviously is not going to the people, and you're seeing the protests now.
Yeah, I mean, thousands of Americans' blood on their hands. They support Hezbollah. They hate Israel. Our president is now saying he supports these protesters. And then in 2 weeks, he has the opportunity to the sanctions were lifted in 2015 with the Iran nuclear deal. He has to, every 120 days, the president of the United States has to go back through and decide whether or not he wants to continue those sanctions to be lifted. So he has a major decision to make in the next few weeks.
So what they have to do is, and I'm sure the president, very few presidents are better at this than our current president, working one-on-one with other leaders. Maybe Merkel and he still have some friction, but he can work with Theresa May, he can work with Macron, he can work with the Italian leader, and get everybody on the same page to say, if the crackdown continues, with 21 dead already, if the crackdown continues where you shut down social media, we're going to begin to put the creep sanctions back in, not just from the U.S., but from the European leaders.
Now, you do realize that in addition to everything else that's been going on, you've got people over on MSNBC saying that because President Trump has blocked a couple of Americans on Twitter, people who were clogging up his mentions with hateful comments towards him and his wife and his son and his adult children, that he's just like the mullahs in Iran because they've shut down Twitter. So you've got the shutting down of Twitter over here, the entire access to Twitter completely obliterated for Iranians. And then you've got the president blocking 1 or 2 or 12, some indiscriminate number, some tiny number of individuals who basically they made a nuisance of themselves. And so he blocked them, which is the normal thing to do. It used to be kind of fun, 3, 4, 5 years ago. You would go on Twitter, and if a troll entered into your mentions and started, kind of haranguing you, you would engage them and go back and forth. And then a bunch of, people who follow you would see the engagement, and then there'd be a big back and forth, and it had a kind of huge social media impact. Nowadays, people don't want to read that. They don't want to see it in their mentions. So if you get into too many of those slap fights on Twitter, people, instead of engaging with it, they unfollow you. So a complete change in the way that people, the dynamic, if you will. So it is not shocking that if normal people, that's what they do, you see someone who comes over and their only purpose is to annoy you on Twitter, then you block them and they'll go annoy someone else. It's like those stinky flies that fly around horses. You have to put up one of those traps and then they go to the trap instead of annoying the horses. Something similar to that. So for what reason would the president permit someone who is constantly in his Twitter feed insulting him and his family members? Why would he allow that? Why would he just leave that there? So he blocks them, and somehow that's an infringement on the freedom of Americans as a whole, as opposed to the shutting down of the entire Twitter network. Access to Twitter, which is an organizing tool by many people, that's supposed to be the same. Not only does that statement stink to high heaven because it's just not true, it also gives you a peek into the mind of these political operatives on the left. They simply can't stand the president. He could be out watering flowers and they'd find a way to say, well, he's killing those flowers because his hate flows through the water as well, and that's just killing all those flowers. Silliness. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Jesse Kelly from the Resurgent and more Stacy on the Right. Stay right there.
Hello everyone, I'm Tim Wildman, President of American Family Association and American Family Radio.
You know, our spiritual heritage tours fill up each year several months in advance, and we've got the dates now for our 2018 trips. There are 2 tours. There's one to Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington, and then there's a separate trip to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, where we'll explore early American history. Now, if you want information on these tours, simply go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for all the information. Again, in June and September, you can go on one or you can go on both. They're back to back. We plan them that way. Again, June and September, Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. For all the information, go to spiritualheritagetours.com, and I hope to see you on one of our Spiritual Heritage Tours.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Although the concept of a free enterprise system developed primarily in Europe, it has become the most successful in the United States. Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, has a possible explanation. The founders promoted a free market where Americans were able to truly live their liberty. Thomas Jefferson famously said in his first inaugural address, "A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." This is the sum of good government. People from other countries began to realize how exceptional America's culture of free enterprise was. French nobleman Alexis de Tocqueville called Americans the freest people in the world. He was struck by the fact that Americans pursued their interest under the supervision of limited government and banded together in voluntary associations. This is true to this day. According to Arthur Brooks, Europeans are half as likely as Americans to attribute success in their own life to their own efforts. He even suggests that some of this might even be genetic. It's part of the American DNA. We're a nation of immigrants. Immigrants tend to be entrepreneurs and willing to take risk for the possibility of prosperity. Arthur Brooks contends that we live in a 70-30 nation. A Pew Research Center poll asked a broad range of Americans this question: generally, do you think people are better off in a free market economy? Almost 70% of respondents agree that we are better off in a free market economy. The good news is that 70% of Americans believe in free enterprise. The bad news is the other 30% are in control of important arenas in our society, such as the academy, media, and government. This will be our challenge for the years to come. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
Yeah, we are the colors outside of the lines.
All right, welcome back to the program, everybody. You know what time it is. It's time on Stacy on the Right Show for us to connect with and interface with someone from the Resurgent by the name of Jesse Kayleigh, Marine Corps guy, and overall, you know, rabble-rouser, really. He gets the stuff done. Jesse, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, how you been, Stacy? You having a good New Year?
I have. I'm battling down this cold, which every morning I'm like, ooh, I feel healed. I'm good to go. And then later I'll have a hacking coughing fit. I'm like, oh, I'm still, but I do feel a lot better. I feel more like a human being today than I did over the past week or so. I really kind of fell down the day after Christmas was when this thing hit me hard, and I've been struggling to come back ever since. But the new year has been amazing. I'm still looking for my global warming, obviously. I'm not getting my ration of global warming. But other than that, I think it's been going well. I'm still riding high from the tax reform package and its passage and all of the good news that came after that.
Maybe you can catch Yahoo this morning. They said it's all this cold weather is actually global warming in action. So even now when it's cold, it's because the earth is warming. Either way, just give up that SUV and you'll be fine.
I drive a minivan, so I'm not giving anything up. And our square footage is larger than what they recommend, and I dare them to have anything to say to me about it, because I believe if you pay for it, then that's your thing. If you're living off of the government, then I should get to say how many square feet you get. But if I'm paying for it myself, I don't understand why you even have a comment, because that whole carbon footprint thing. Look at Leonardo DiCaprio. Look at Al Gore. Those are two of the worst offenders when it comes to living large for just two people. And they don't seem like they want to downsize.
All the socialists, all the bourgeois socialist guys always want socialism for everyone else. They always do it from their mansions and behind walled gates and on yachts, but it's always for everyone else, never for them.
Well, so whenever they do it, that's when I'll do it. And even then, I'm still going to back out on that, and I'm not going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so let's talk about
glad to hear you're feeling better, by the way. We just got back from 6 days in Cancun, and it was the absolute vacation from hell of everybody wiped out sick almost the whole time, and my wife came back with a cast on each foot.
No way. Wow. Well, but it was still beautiful there, though. I'm sure you guys got an eyeful of the beauty.
Yes, the weather was absolutely great as we looked out from the hotel room bedridden.
Well, okay, so that doesn't sound like that went very well, but let's kind of unpack. So you, I'm sure, have seen on the news, everyone's now talking about how the Democrats plan to obstruct every little thing that comes out of the GOP-controlled Congress. They're not going to let anything get passed because they hate the reaction that Americans are having to the tax reform bill. So when we look at that as people on the right, what should our response be? What should our plan of attack be to get these things done anyway, in spite of the Democrats? Because we don't have quite the majority that we like, but we are in control.
We should continue doing what we're doing and really focusing on 2018 to win more elections. I mean, we can do some things as we just saw through tax reform, but our hands are tied on several things until we win more seats in 2018. I know the general thinking is that you lose seats in the midterms, generally what happens. But as we've seen, I mean, the election of Donald Trump showed we've broken all the rules on what should happen, what could happen. If we take back just enough seats, and it's going to be a good year for the Senate, almost regardless of what happens, then we can get even more done than we have done. And we should. I mean, we shouldn't forget that Obamacare is still hanging out there, and we got to get rid of it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. Speaking with Jesse Kayleigh, Marine Corps veteran and also contributor to the Resurgent, I want to also kind of highlight a little bit on what you just said there. So obviously the midterms are usually a bloodbath for the Democrats because their people don't turn out, but they just showed us in this last special election that they can actually turn out voters, and they usually lose big because they're in power and they're doing horrible things to the Americans, which then makes the Americans come out angry and, reverse some of the controls. But in this instance, we're riding high from the tax reform, and I don't think we're going to see negative anything from that. I think by the time you get around to November, people are going to be looking at their paychecks and thinking, what happens if we give the Democrats control back? Will they take away this tax cut that I just got? So I actually feel like we've insulated ourselves a great deal, but there's more that can be done. So out of all the different proposals and legislative goals that are currently on the table for 2018, what do you see as the most important one for them to get done? No matter this is their do or die for 2018. What should they work on?
Almost undoubtedly, it's healthcare. Almost undoubtedly, it's healthcare. It's the one thing, if you ask people, it's still hanging out there for people. It's still hanging over everyone's heads. Everyone will bring it up in any political conversation, period. Even if it's some kind of skinny repeal, which is not good. It's not what we want. But the public has to view that they've done something because they were put there, and Trump was put there too, with such a mandate to do something about it. Unless he does something, or the Congress does something, it'll be viewed as a failure. And you know what? Frankly, that's kind of fair. 7 years, giving back the House, giving back the Senate, giving back the presidency. The public has every right to feel like you should do something about it.
I agree. And I also think it could be so easily done, coming on the heels of the new rule that was just made by President Trump that insurance can be purchased across state lines, like car insurance, really just kind of normalizing health insurance. So couldn't they put together a package that piggybacked off of that and remove the government portions of Obamacare, create some skinny little program that deals with people who just can't figure it out, who are, not employed and not insured by their employer, and for everyone else, let the free market be unleashed so that healthcare costs can actually come down?
They could, and I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but the whole point of Obamacare, I mean, Trump has already decided not to enforce the mandate. He's already doing the state lines thing, as you talked about. But the whole point of Obamacare was the forcing insurance coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. That is the most unpopular portion of the bill to overturn. People like the sound of that, and when really it's the whole problem. Until that goes away, then the bill itself goes away. Because until you stop making insurance companies cover people who are already sick, then insurance costs really aren't going to go down in a significant way. And that's what they did. They allowed me to show up with my house already on fire and purchase home insurance. And that's just, it doesn't work that way. Math-wise, it does not work.
Yeah, and it's not fair to the rest of us who are, people who are busting their wallets paying for insurance and they're not sick. And then when they do get sick, they experience the ramifications of Obamacare's taxes, which means they actually have less coverage, but they've been paying in all along. So I understand young people getting just the catastrophic plans. I mean, what's the point of having full insurance there unless it's provided by your employer? But once people start getting into that, they're married, they're starting to, build a family, then we need to encourage people by making sure that it's something that it's a no-brainer. No one who has any real sense or cares about their bottom line financially goes without car insurance. And so it should be that kind of a common sense approach, which can only be driven by the free market.
Agreed. But it's the more the government is involved in it, and people don't remember how involved the government was in it before Obamacare. That's why costs were going up. So even if we repeal parts of Obamacare, there's still way too much government in healthcare to get the cost down in any significant way. Now, the problem we see is the GOP may have control over the House, Senate presidency, but there's still no public outcry to get the government out of healthcare, the public outcry to get the government to reduce the cost of healthcare. The government can't do that. The only way they can do that is get out of it.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit about Iran. And the protests that are going on there. The leftists want to focus on the fact that the president tweeted something harsh, which, I just don't care about his tweets, but oftentimes when I look at them just to see what the hubbub is about, I'm shocked by how really it's like common sense stuff that you or I would say. He tweets it out and they lose their minds. They're completely ignoring the fact that he's in the position of supporting the protesters where President Obama supported the mullahs. What do you make of that? And also, where do you see the protests going?
Well, as far as where the protests go, I hope they go all the way to tossing the mullahs out on their rear end. And I think actually Trump has handled this one really well. I love a lot of what he does on Twitter, and I hate some of it. I think a lot of it's a distraction. I think he's handled this one completely presidential and right. He's thrown support behind the people and said, hey, if you want to be free, throw these guys off. And the protests don't seem to be dying down and going away. And that's usually a great sign because the government's starting to really crack down on these people. And when governments do that and the people don't go away, there may be some real lasting power to this. And I hope they do it. I hope they throw them out. And I hope the next guy that gets in is better than the current one they have, because we've seen this a lot, especially in that part of the world, where they toss out a horrible dictator and the guy who replaces him does bad or worse. We don't want a situation like that.
I agree. I think the most important thing that we can do is to continue to have our leadership, like UN Ambassador Kayleigh and the president, speak out in support of the protesters, and to call out the human rights abuses that are going on, and the fact that they're using their little internet switches to shut down the ability for Iranians to communicate with the outside world via Twitter and online social media.
Yeah, and we've already seen they're starting to do that. At the very beginning of the protest, we were getting, especially if you followed it on Twitter, we were getting a new video every 30 seconds from the protests, from clashes with police, and you see that's died down a lot. It's giving the impression the protests have died down, which from what I understand, that's not the case. But Trump already put in, I believe, 5 new Iranian sanctions today, and I think he's handling this outstanding. Frankly, most of his foreign policy has been outstanding so far.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we don't see them talking about on MSNBC, but I see it here on the cover of Drudge, Dow 25,000. 250,000 jobs created in the month of December. Layoffs the lowest since 1990. Companies announcing bonuses all over the place after the passage of the tax reform bill. And the regulatory impact we have yet to see. I mean, we're really honestly, no one's going to come out and say, 100 fewer regulations means I'm going to blah, blah, blah with my business. They're just going to hit the ground running and create jobs. I'm having a hard time, Jesse, seeing a downside to this kind of activity by this. He's not a politician. He's not a genuine Republican, according to the establishment never Trumpers. Yet look at the governance here.
He's been dynamite. I mean, to be honest, I never saw this coming. He has been the most conservative president of my lifetime so far. To this point, I mean, he's packing the courts with conservative justices, which we never talk about. He's gutting the government with regulations, and he won't appoint all these people to fill federal positions, and he doesn't even act like he has a desire to do so. So he's actually trying to reduce the government, and he's cutting taxes. I keep trying to tell my anti-Trump friends, you better get used to him, because he's going to get reelected, and he's going to get reelected, in my opinion, easily. Now, a lot can happen between now and 2020, but a president, it's hard enough to bounce a sitting president. You don't bounce a sitting president with a booming economy. When you see the down at 25,000, he's coming back, and he's coming back in a big way because people do vote with their pocketbook, above all.
Even Democrats.
Even Democrats. Even those Rust Belt blue state Democrats or purple state Democrats that went for Trump. I mean, he's snatching up Wisconsin. Wisconsin's coming back because those guys are at work. They're not going to take a chance on something else. They're at work. They're putting food on the table. They're coming back.
I love that. I hope that's the truth, because I'd like to see the president continue to honor the campaign promises that he made, and there were many. I mean, he didn't shy away from tackling the tough issues. What is your thought on DACA? I actually had from the RNC, Kayleigh McEnany came on today, and it was my first true understanding as she was describing the reason why the Republicans are willing to give the DACA, so-called children, these grown-ups who were brought here as children, to give them amnesty is because the things they're asking for in return are basically the complete overhaul of the immigration system, the end to chain migration, the funding for the wall, that whole bit. What do you think is going to happen here?
I think we're going to get our teeth kicked in like always. I don't remember the last time we've ever had an immigration debate that went our way. It always ends up with more illegal immigrants getting either full citizenship or access to everything in the United States of America and nothing but immigration enforcement on paper and nothing else. Now, Trump seems committed to this, and hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully we'll get real enforcement. And look, if we get real enforcement, if they stop chain migration, which frankly is one of the biggest things, if they really do all the things they're asking for, then yeah, I hate DACA. I don't think those people should stay, but if they do, not the end of the world. I just don't have much faith that we're going to win that battle because we never did. The last time we pushed the big immigration bill, Gang of Eight, La Raza helped write the DACA. So no, I'm not hopeful when it comes to that.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not either, but I do at least like the strategy that they're proposing. And I had actually begun to think we wouldn't get anything done, and then they pull the tax reform out, and it has been such a good development that I'm hoping that taste of victory will be so sweet they'll want it again. They'll want it enough to really fight on that issue, because it's what the president ran on. We have to win on that one. So I hope that your pessimism proves to be, wise, but not quite on the mark this time. But I totally understand where you're coming from.
So do I.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse. Jesse Kelly, contributor to The Resurgent. I hope you guys are feeling better and that you have a happy new year. We'll be back with more right after this.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Have you ever been jealous of someone? Maybe your coworker got the position you felt you deserved, along with the raise. Maybe your neighbor invited you
as Trump country and the rest of the country.
How's this playing in Trump country?
Raise new questions about whether Democrats can survive in Trump country.
This is still Trump country.
We are going to go to Trump country.
A victory in Trump country.
Voters potentially in Trump country.
Politics of grievance in Trump country.
This is Trump country.
From Western New York, who says he's in the heart of Trump country.
This is the heart of Trump country.
You're in Wilmington, Ohio, in sort of the heart of Trump country.
In Beat Red, Oklahoma. Trump country.
Reporting from Ohio, that is indeed Trump country. It came back from this family trip to Ohio. It is still Trump country.
So many people in Michigan up in Trump country.
North Dakota, that's Trump country.
Yep.
West Virginia, which is, ground zero of Trump country. In these sort of Trump country districts.
In Trump country.
We've gone to Trump country. Reach into Trump country.
Trump country.
Trump country.
In Trump country.
Trump country.
In Trump country. Necessarily Trump country.
All in America, Bernie Sanders in Trump country.
So does that sound like a moniker that they're applying to those people because they like them or respect them or think they're intelligent? Or are they trying to tar and feather these people and hopefully shame them into not voting for the policies and ideas that are currently bringing a ton of prosperity to Americans? Yeah, so using the president's name as an insult, Trump country. They did have the one, Frederica Wilson out of Texas, at some point during the Obama administration said Obama country. And I believe she was widely vilified for doing that. It's not a positive attribute that they're trying to impart when they say Trump country. If you watch the video, their faces are kind of like Trump country. Can Democrats survive in Trump country? It's like you're talking about a place that has a sewage problem. I mean, it's crazy, but there it is. That's where we are with these Democrats. So now I want to switch back over and talk about the North Koreans offering the olive branch. John Bolton was on Mornings with Maria, and I think it was Mornings with Maria. I've listened to so much audio today. So he's on there talking about the North Korean olive branch and how they're just really vying for time so that they can complete their nuclear program. It's number 5.
What we should do is move more forces to Guam, to Japan, into the Yellow Sea and the East Sea, because I don't think the military threat, the potential use of military force is going to be taken seriously until that buildup takes place. And it may sound paradoxical, but I think the one chance we have of convincing China that they better crack down themselves on North Korea, my view is we should reunify the peninsula, but to get China's attention is to make the military threat credible, and that hasn't happened yet.
Right. So what does this president need to do? I mean, I feel like a lot of the moves that President Trump has made has been as much to the subject as it is a message to China. For example, the strikes to Syria, telling the president of China while they're having dinner at Mar-a-Lago, the tough stance and the tough talk against North Korea, the fact that ISIS is being defeated. All of these are messages to China. We're serious. Do not mess around. Get on board or be with the terrorists. What's your take on that? What else does he need to do?
Well, I think that is the president's message. I mean, it took a while to convince a lot of foreign leaders that Barack Obama was no longer president. I think that's been accomplished. But whether the Chinese believe more is coming, I think is very much open to question. They've still followed their script, which is appease the Americans for a little while, cut off a little bit of oil, raise the temperature a little bit, and then when you think the Americans have their attention has wandered away, go back to business as usual. So under current circumstances, if the projections made by CIA Director Mike Pompeo and others about how close the North has gotten in the past 12 to 18 months are accurate, there's not a lot of time to waste here. Talking to the North Koreans is a waste of time. Talking to the Chinese is increasingly I think, unlikely to produce the kind of result we need. So you're getting down fairly quickly to a binary choice. Live with North Korea with nuclear weapons, which Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, is prepared to do, or look at military force. These are not attractive options, but that's where we're headed.
So, first of all, I appreciate a truth teller. And one thing we can count on John Bolton for, especially in the foreign policy area, is that he's going to come with the straight up look, no candy coating it, no frosting. He's just going to give you the straight medicine. And I think a lot of people understand what he just said, but it's not like you're sitting around the table or you're talking to friends and saying, so how about those military options with North Korea? Now, he mentions a military buildup and how you can, how America could basically just build up a whole lot of our assets in that area. But what he didn't talk about is the lack of military readiness that we're currently experiencing after having President Obama gut the military services and lower the funding. And really, a lot of our systems are now older. They're some obsolete. A lot of the crew chiefs and other maintenance guys are, patching planes together with old cannibalized parts from, they call them museum pieces, but they're old parts that should not be in use. And they're having to do that because we've not done proper procurement to keep our fleets up to military readiness standards. And so I always get somebody who'll email me and say, what are you talking about? We spend more than the next 95 countries combined. Yeah, we also have the best equipment. And so the fancier the equipment, the higher the maintenance costs. Ask anybody who owns a BMW or a Lexus what their maintenance costs are like compared to someone who drives a Honda or a Toyota. It's a totally different world you're living in. And then compare what they pay to people who drive Maybachs and Bentleys and what their maintenance requirements are for those vehicles. And then you kind of get an inkling of what we're talking about here. Never mind the fact that I'm talking about expensive cars and the equipment that is obsolete or in dire need of refurbishing, maintenance, and updating for the military. We're talking about tankers, tanks, aircraft carriers, and missile systems, aircraft, fighter jets, carrier fleets. We're talking about things that are far more complex than a fancy car. But, by all means, act as if the military leaders and the people who are in charge of all of this don't know anything about what's going on there. And you certainly know more sitting on your couch. That it's the time for us equivocating on that issue is over. The fastest way to get cooperation from allies who sometimes act like enemies or allies like China, who they've been playing both sides fast and loose. They've been saying, oh, we're not selling Korea any oil. We're abiding by the sanctions. But then our satellites that are constantly patrolling the area and giving us video and everything from that area show that they are under cover of night, unmarked tankers, et cetera, they're still selling oil to North Korea. They're still dealing with North Korea. They've even begun to, in anticipation of the possibility of some kind of conflict, create refugee centers. I mean, they're always, kind of like, well, this might happen. We might as well be prepared. So why won't we get prepared as a military power to have all of our fleets up to snuff? It's an indication that we're prepared to use those fleets. That's what we need right now. And so the good news is we have a president who's willing to do that. The bad news is we have a very active political party on the left that doesn't care anything about our military readiness. They don't want us to be a strong power in the world. And more than that, we have just the truth as it pertains to what I'm talking about here, which is updating the military. It's not like someone who buys a fixer-upper house for, $100,000 and it's 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, and they can turn that around in 4 weeks. Updating our systems involves ordering the parts. The parts have to be manufactured, and then they have to be, sent to the proper appropriate places. Those pieces of machinery have to be taken out of operation, which means something to replace it has to be utilized, because your military readiness is a 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year thing. There are no off days. People have days off, but the military readiness aspect does not ever take a holiday. So you have to have the people to actually do the work. You have to have the properly trained individuals to oversee all of that. You have to have the procurement process. You have to get the needed parts and equipment to the actual locations. And then you have to give the crew chiefs and other maintenance people time to do the repairs or time to remove the old equipment from operation and bring the new equipment in. People have to be trained. I mean, yes, a pilot is a pilot is a pilot. There's a huge difference between someone who flies a C-130 and someone who's flying an F-16E or whatever the jet is. So there's so much to this. And the negative part of it, the part that is really it's of concern to us, is that this is the position we're in after 8 years of President Obama's just malicious intent towards our national sovereignty and our military. And this is what happens. And so when you're in the voting booth and you're thinking about who looks cool, who wears a suit, who's awesome, and which is, this is the guy who's going to do this, he's going to do that. He's going to, give us hope and change. He's also going to tear down the military readiness. He's also going to, in his fundamental transformation of the nation, bring our military down to its knees. He's going to change the focus and function of the military by making it a social justice experimentation center, by making people who are mentally ill a priority for healthcare services, namely sex changes, and deteriorate the level of camaraderie and functionality of the troops. This is not the work, not the place for that kind of experimentation. And it's not the job of someone who not only didn't serve in the military, not only doesn't have any family members who served in the military. Forget all of that. A man who didn't really respect military service, a man who didn't have an affinity for military people or veterans, a man who couldn't even bring himself to do things that would protect the people who've already gone out and done that service. So, when the Bible says when godless leaders are in charge, the people wail. They cry out. And so just like the analogy of cleaning the swamp, just like, I compare what's going on right now with President Trump to tackling the house of a hoarder. If you ever watched the show, I'm not sure what network it's on, but when it was on regular television, we used to have cable. I used to watch it sometimes, and my kids would say, "Why are you watching this?" I'm like, "It's a cautionary tale. I'm sorry. It's like I can't look away." And I didn't watch it all the time, but I've seen enough episodes to know that there's a certain formulation for the show. And the reason that works is because hoarders behave in this similar fashion no matter what. You go in and you can't get into the house more than one person at a time. You have to walk in single file through all of the mess that's piled up to the ceilings. There's a thin pathway and you're walking on rodent droppings and sometimes dead rodents themselves. There are bugs present. It's a disgusting, horrible mess. And there's a pathway to the toilet and there's a pathway to the kitchen where there may or may not be a functioning refrigerator, but there's a stove that works. And so these people will go out and they go to yard sales and they'll buy more stuff and they just pile it on top of the teeter-tottering, both sides are like teeter-tottering down on you. And when the family members come in and say, "This is a fire hazard, the house has been condemned, if we don't clean it out, you're going to be evicted from here." And the person will say, "Yeah, but I own this place outright and I get the best deals, I'm frugal." And then they have to work through this process of convincing the person to let them clean out the hoarder house. They have to convince them. Once they get past that, the person then fights over every dried up piece of cardboard from 1922, every plastic doll that has no value that they claim is just, a treasure waiting for some antique collector to unearth. Everything is worth $100,000. It's valuable. It's a piece of great worth. When really what we're looking at is the accumulation of a lot of garbage that these people paid money for. And if you take that situation and you compare it to Washington, D.C. and think about how many people, because the ladies at The View think when you use the term deep state, it's a symptom that you are mentally ill. But I'll tell you who's really mentally ill. People who defend a U.S. government that won't fire people who spend hours a day watching pornography. That's a sign of mental illness. Not believing that there are people who are so deeply entrenched and willing to maintain the current system that they'll do anything, even break the law. And so in the process of cleaning out the hoarder house on the show, you get so frustrated watching it because the person continually goes back to, "Why, you're just doing this to hurt me. You just want to get rid of all of my favorite things." And the people, their family members are like, "No, we're trying to clean the house out so it's not condemned so you can keep living here." So they finally get the place cleaned out. And usually, because sometimes there's been a fire there and the person after the fire, they just pile the stuff back up and, keep on moving. Usually then The house is barely livable, but at least it's empty. Then they have to go through and make repairs, holes in the wall, you know, no appliances, no furniture, no working plumbing. That is what's going on in Washington, D.C. That's why the President of the United States can repeal 16 regulations for every new one that he implements, and nobody has said a peep. He hasn't even cleaned out one room of the hoarder house, and the people in the hoarder house are losing their minds. So he has to keep going. And we have to keep going with our prayers for all of them, Democrats and Republicans. And we have to respect the process because we know it's going to be nasty, slow, and frustrating. But it has to be done. You know, or the place gets condemned. So that's the show for today. I'll be back with you tomorrow. More Stacy on the Right. Have a great night. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban